She'd learned men meant danger, until one man offered her a home, not a bargain. "Then share mine forever," he said. Don't miss what came next. Montana Territory, September 1880. The train screamed into the wind-blown platform at Red Creek Station, steam spiraling into the brittle air, and Clara Wynne stepped down with a carpetbag in one hand and a tight breath caged in her chest. She had never left Missouri before. She had never traveled alone, and she had never shared a bed with a man. The thought turned her stomach, but she wasn't here for foolishness. She was here for work, survival, and the faint hope of a new life, if such a thing could exist for a woman like her. The telegram had come from a rancher needing help with his 2 children. She knew little more than a name, a place, and the promise of pay. She had no family left, no husband, no one to care whether she lived or died, so she answered. She lifted her chin and walked toward the hitching post, where a tall man leaned beside a bay gelding. His sleeves were rolled. Sun had darkened his skin to a coppered wheat. The brim of his hat shadowed his face, but he held himself with a stillness that made her pause. "You Clara Wynne?" he asked. She nodded. "I'm James Calder," he said, tipping his hat. "You took my wire." She looked up at him, and he was handsomer than she'd prepared for. Sharp jaw, dark hair curling above his collar, eyes like riverstone. He looked tired, not only in the body, but in some quiet place behind his shoulders. "I did. You said you have children who need looking after." He nodded. "Their ma passed 2 winters back. Been trying to manage the ranch and raise them, but I ain't doing either all that well." She did not ask about their mother. Some things lived heavy in a man's eyes, and she had seen enough loss to recognize it. He helped her into the saddle and tied her carpetbag behind them. "You ride much?" "Not really." He offered a low chuckle. "Well, best hang on." They rode out of town into open country, the sky without end. The sun flattened against the far ridges, and the ranch came into view. Wide split-log house, small barn, pastures opening like a painting. 2 children ran out barefoot when they arrived, a girl about 10 with a braid down her back, and a boy maybe 7, straw-colored hair, and a gap in his grin. "Elsie, Tom," James called. "Come meet Miss Wynne." The girl stood straighter. "Are you going to be our new mama?" Clara's heart hitched. "No, sweetheart. I'm here to help your father." Tom frowned. "Mama used to braid Elsie's hair every morning." "I can do that," Clara said gently. Elsie's eyes softened. "Okay." The house was simple and clean, if worn. A pot still sat on the stove, dried herbs hanging from the rafters. James showed her a small back room with a narrow bed and a wash basin near the window. "You'll be comfortable here," he said. "Tell me if you need something." She studied him. "You seem a good father." He leaned against the doorframe. "I try. This world's rough, and I reckon I'm better with horses than hair ribbons." She smiled, the first true smile since stepping off the train. "Then it's a good thing I came." He nodded and stepped away. That night she braided Elsie's hair by lamplight, read Tom a story from her Bible, and sat alone at the edge of the bed, hands quiet in her lap. She had never shared a bed. Her marriage had been short and brutal. She had run, and now she was here. The next weeks settled into rhythm. Mornings began with chores, chickens fed, eggs collected, porch swept. Elsie and Tom followed her like shadows, full of questions and laughter, and something tight in Clara's chest began to loosen. She sang while she cooked. She stitched Tom's torn shirt. She taught Elsie how to read the word hope. James watched with quiet eyes. He was not a loud man, but he noticed everything: how she preferred tea over coffee, how she kept her shoes clean, how she tucked her hair behind one ear when she concentrated. One night, a storm rolled over the flats, thunder cracking the sky. Tom cried out. Clara leapt from bed and found him trembling in the hallway. "I want Mama," he sobbed. She knelt and gathered him close. "I know, love, I know." James stepped from the other room, worry tight on his face. "You all right?" Clara looked up at him, rocking the boy. "He is now." That night, she curled beside Tom in the big bed until he slept. James stood in the doorway watching, then turned and walked away. Days later, they rode into town for supplies. On the way back, the wagon wheel gave out. James cursed softly and jumped down to check the damage. "Can it be fixed?" Clara asked. "Not today. We'll have to walk it." It was 6 miles home. The sun dropped lower as they walked in silence for a time. "I never expected this," Clara said at last. "What?" "This life. These children. You." He glanced at her. "You regret it?" She shook her head. Number just surprised. They stopped beneath a cottonwood. The wind caught her hair, and he reached to tuck it behind her ear. His fingers brushed her cheek, and both of them stilled. "I've never shared a bed," she whispered. His eyes burned into hers. "Then share mine forever." She blinked. He swallowed. "I ain't asking for tonight, not even tomorrow. But if you ever want more than mending shirts and braiding hair, I want you to know it's here." Something inside her stopped, then thrummed to life again. "I have known hurt," she said. "I won't be part of that again." "I won't give it," he said. She nodded slowly. "I believe you." They walked home without another word, but the air between them hummed. That night, she sat by the window and watched the stars. When James passed her door, he paused. She stood. He didn't speak. She walked to him and placed her hand in his. He lifted it to his chest, over his heart, and held it there. "You don't have to be alone anymore," he whispered. For the first time in years, she believed him. By late October, the wind carried an edge. Mornings came frosted silver, and the sun lagged over the hills. Clara stood on the porch before dawn, shawl tight, watching her breath. Inside, Elsie stirred, and Tom's quiet voice followed, muffled under quilts. The door opened. "You'll catch cold," James said. "I wanted to see the sky before the stove smoke changed its color." He stepped beside her, thumb working at a cuff button. "You talk soft and strange. I never know what you'll say." "Do you want me to stop?" I want to hear the next thing." They stood without speaking as the sun broke over the ridge, pouring light over the fence line. Horses pawed the frozen ground. The rooster crowed late, offended at the cold. "Elsie wants to help with cooking now," Clara said. "She asked if I'd teach her to make cornbread without burning the edges. She used to sit on the counter with her feet in the flour bin, watching her ma," he said. "I won't ask her to stop remembering." "I didn't think you would." She turned to go inside, but James caught her hand. "I've been thinking about what I said." "So have I." "I meant it. It doesn't have to be now. I just want you here when the snow comes." Her fingers curled around his. "I don't know how to be wanted without being used." "Then let me show you slow." That morning, she let Elsie measure the cornmeal and pour the buttermilk. She didn't correct the girl's crooked stirring or the little mess. Tom sat at the table, tongue tucked in concentration, carving a pine sliver with James's whittling knife. After breakfast, James hitched the wagon to fetch fencing wire from a neighbor nearly 20 miles east. Clara packed him bread, apples, and a folded note he didn't see her slip beneath the napkin. He wouldn't return until the day after next. That afternoon, she showed the children how to press wildflowers between pages of an old ledger. Tom picked a yellow daisy still holding on. Elsie chose a sprig of sage. Clara wrote their names beneath each plant in careful ink. Later, she pulled the rocking chair onto the porch and patched the knees of Tom's work pants. Elsie came out with her shawl and leaned against the rail. "Do you like my papa?" Elsie asked. Clara looked up. "Yes, I do. I think he likes you too. He talks nicer when you're around." Clara smiled at the fabric. "He's a good man, Elsie. You could stay forever if you wanted. I just might." By the time James returned, the high ridges wore a sugar of snow. His coat was rimmed with frost where it had soaked and refroze. He stomped slush from his boots and set the fencing wire by the barn. "Clara," he called. She stepped out, wiping her hands on her apron. "You're late." "Got caught behind a herd moving east. Lost near an hour. You find the note?" He blinked. "What note?" "In the bundle," she said, pulling her shawl close. "I wrote that I hoped you'd come back before the snow stuck." He studied her face. "I'd have come even if it buried the hills." That night, after the children slept, she waited by the hearth. James sat across from her, elbows on his knees. "You said you'd show me slow," she said. "I'd like to start learning." He didn't move for a moment. Then he stood, crossed the room, and offered his hand. She rose and placed her fingers in his again. They walked to the back room together, where everything had once belonged only to her. He didn't take off his boots until she had sat on the bed and pulled hers off first. He watched her movements like a man memorizing a map. When their shoulders touched, he asked, "You sure?" She nodded, not because she was sure of everything, but because the ground under her felt steady for the first time in years. They lay side by side, barely touching. Firelight flickered on the walls. Wind brushed the eaves. "I've never slept beside someone who let me rest," she whispered. "I don't want to be anything but that," he said. She closed her eyes, and for the first time since Missouri, slept through the night. By early November, the mornings bit deeper through wool sleeves, and the woodpile shrank faster than James liked. He rose before first light to split more, frost crackling beneath his boots, and Clara sometimes watched from the kitchen window while she stirred corn mush for the children. She didn't say it aloud, but she liked the rhythm of him moving through the yard, deliberate, unhurried, strong in a way built for staying. She'd grown used to the sound of his boots on the steps, the way he wiped his hands on his trousers before lifting a child or touching her shoulder. She hadn't returned to her own room. That morning, Elsie brushed her doll's hair with a piece of bone comb while Tom counted dried beans into a tin cup. "I saw a fox by the fence line," Elsie said. "White face, crooked tail." "Did it see you?" Clara asked. "It stopped and stared like it was thinking," Elsie said. "Maybe it was a spirit," Tom whispered. "Spirits have wings," Elsie said, certain. "Not if they're foxes," Tom muttered. Clara kissed Tom's head. "Spirits or not, no walking past the fence without your father or me. Wild things get hungry this time of year." That afternoon, James rode to help a neighbor move cattle before the lower trails drifted shut. He wouldn't be back until dusk. Clara taught the children to cut fabric for a quilt she'd started from scraps tucked in her trunk. "I want stars," Elsie said, sifting pieces. "You choose them. I'll help stitch." Tom squinted at his square. "Mine looks like a potato." "It's a very fine potato," Clara said, and he grinned. After the children slept, she sat by the hearth with her mending and listened for hoofbeats. Wind picked up, rattling the shutters. She thought of James out in it, coat pulled tight, riding through the dark. When he finally returned, his cheeks were raw with cold, and his hat was rimmed with snow. "You're late," she said, rising. "Had to ride wide around a downed tree. Mule near bucked us into a ravine." She crossed the floor without thinking, loosened his scarf, brushed the ice from his collar. He caught her wrist gently and held it against his chest. "Wasn't sure you'd still be up." "I don't sleep easy when you're out." He nodded, then bent and pressed his lips to the inside of her wrist before letting go. Later, in bed, she turned toward him. "Ever think about leaving this land?" He blinked slow. "What for?" "I don't know. I've never stayed anywhere long enough to know staying." "You want to leave?" I want to know what it feels like to belong somewhere on purpose." "You do," he said. "You belong here because you chose to." She traced a seam in the quilt. "If winter's hard, we'll get through," he said. "If spring brings fire, we'll get through that too. What if it's me that breaks something?" He looked at her a long time. "Then I'll help you fix it." She didn't answer, only moved closer, tucking beneath his arm. He held her like something precious, but not fragile, and she knew a man like him would never ask her to be less. At first light, the fire was low and the room cold, but James's hand was still wrapped around hers. She stayed a while, listening to the wind scrape the walls, wondering how a woman like her had found a bed that felt like shelter. She rose quietly and lit the stove. When she reached for the flour tin, she noticed a folded paper tucked beneath the ledger. Not her handwriting, a land deed, creased and worn. Her name had been added beside his in careful ink. "You did this," she said as he stepped into the room, hair damp from the pump, shirt half buttoned. He nodded once. "It's your home, too. You didn't ask. Figured you'd earned it long before you said yes to me." She walked to him, slow. "I'll stay through winter," she said. He smiled. "Stay through spring, too?" She cupped his jaw. "Through everything." He nodded, quiet. Once was enough. November came hushed, and the first snow that stuck fell overnight, blanketing the valley in white. The children woke early and fogged the window with their breath while Clara stoked the stove with the last of the dry aspen. James had left before dawn to help a neighbor drive sheep down ahead of the drifts. He'd scratched a note into the almanac margin, the only paper handy. She found it beside the coffee pot, ran her fingers over his slanted hand, then tucked it behind the flour tin. Elsie and Tom bundled into coats and scarves, tumbling into the yard, chasing through the powder. Clara followed, boots crunching, and hung laundry in the lean-to, breath drifting in slow clouds. The children built a crooked snow woman with a stick arm and a rock mouth. Later, while Tom napped, Elsie shaped beeswax into a small horse, tongue poking at the corner of her mouth. "Did you have a mama who taught you things when you were little?" Elsie asked, not looking up. "No," Clara said. "Not for long." "What happened?" "She got sick the same year the river flooded. Everything changed." "Did it make you sad all the time?" Not all the time. Just in the quiet places." Elsie nodded. "Sometimes I feel sad in the quiet, too." Clara brushed a crumb from Elsie's sleeve. "That's how we remember the ones we miss. It doesn't mean we're broken." By afternoon, wind pushed drifts against the barn. Clara latched the shutters and brought in the chickens early. The evening fire whispered. Wind sighed through the seams. Tom curled against her on the rug, clutching the cloth doll his mother had sewn. He pressed his cheek to her thigh and closed his eyes. James returned after dark, his coat stiff with frozen sleet. Clara met him at the door with a towel and dry socks. He didn't speak at first, just looked at her, as if something had settled in him during the ride. "You're late," she said. "Couldn't go till they got the last ewe off the ridge. Snow was past my stirrups at the creek." She unwound his scarf carefully. "You didn't eat?" "No." She brought him a bowl of stew, left warming, and sat across from him, hands folded. "Heard from a man in Helena," he said between bites. "Selling a printing press and a stack of old school books. Belonged to a teacher who passed a couple years back. Thought maybe Elsie might want them." "Books?" she asked. He nodded. "And a cabinet press small enough for the barn loft." "You want to teach her to print?" "I thought you might want to." Surprise flickered behind her ribs. "You kept that to yourself." "Wanted to be sure before I said it out loud." She watched him finish, then stood and held out her hand. He took it without a word, and they walked to the back room. That night, beneath the thick quilt, she turned toward him, voice low. "I used to think I'd spend my life never being seen." "You're seen," he said. "Clear as day. You're giving me more than any man ever has. That's because I'm not giving it like a trade. You don't owe me." She slipped her hand over his, anchoring herself in the quiet. "You ever think you might love me?" he asked. She didn't pull away. "I think I already do." He exhaled, slow, like something long held had finally been set down. At dawn, she wrote a list for winter stores, added cloth for bookbindings and lamp oil for the loft. When James came in from feeding stock, she handed him the paper. "You planning to stay through summer too?" he asked. She nodded, soft but sure. "Then I'll double the sugar. Elsie might start baking." She already asked for pie tins. "I'll ride out tomorrow." "You'll ride home too," she said. He smiled, eyes catching hers, always. When the north wind came howling, it found a house sealed warm and a woman who no longer flinched at the sound of it. December snow deepened, heavy and wet, piling high along the eaves, softening the world to hush. Days ran in quiet rhythm, firewood stacked, stock-fed, bread rising slow at the back of the stove. Inside, Clara moved with the ease of belonging. She no longer paused before speaking, no longer hesitated to reach for James's hand when he came in with snow in his beard and the pasture on his coat. She knew the slope of his shoulder at sleep, the way he lifted Tom without strain, how he always poured her coffee before his own. James cleared the barn loft, swept it clean, and set the crate with the press beside a small table he'd built from leftover planks. Clara ran her fingers over the metalwork, reverent. "I was 13 the first time I saw one," she said. "My uncle printed town notices and wedding announcements. I used to sneak in and press the letters into my palm." "You never took it up proper?" "There wasn't time. No one asked if I wanted to." "I'm asking now." She looked back at him, steadier than surprised. "Then I'll learn." Each afternoon after lessons, Elsie climbed the ladder and helped set type. Her fingers went black with ink, and she laughed when her first try came out backward. Clara showed her how to space lines, how to press the platen evenly. Tom, too small to reach the table, sat on a hay bale and read aloud from the primer while they worked. One evening, with light fading early and wind rattling the doors, James climbed the ladder and handed Clara a folded sheet. "What's this?" she asked. "Something I wrote down. Thought you might print it." She unfolded it. A short verse, plain spoken and warm, about the sound of boots on pine and how love could live in the quiet. "You wrote this?" He nodded. "Didn't say I was proud of it." "I am." She printed it clean, ink still tacky when she handed it back. He tucked it into his pocket, kissed her temple, and went down the ladder. That night, after the children slept, she pulled a small canvas bag from beneath the bed. Inside was a length of blue cotton with tiny ivory flowers, saved untouched since the spring before her marriage. "I was saving this for when I felt certain," she said, holding it up. James sat at the edge of the bed, watching. "And you feel that now?" "I do." "You want to wear it for something?" His voice was careful, not teasing. "I want to wear it when we say vows." He didn't blink. "You asking me?" "I'm telling you, I'm ready." He rose, took her hands in his. "We'll speak them in spring when the creek runs again. I don't need a preacher." "Nor do I. Just you and the children and the land that gave us back our lives." She folded into him. "You give me more than anyone ever has." "You gave me back something I thought was gone," he said. By March, the snows melted down the hillsides. Sap ran in the cottonwoods, the hens laid regular. Tom lost a second tooth and buried it beside the porch to keep it near. Elsie asked to print a story she'd written about a fox who built a pine-cone house and taught birds to sing. On the first warm day, James stood in the pasture with Clara, the sun going gold across the damp ground. The children tucked wild violets into her braid. She wore the blue cotton dress. He wore the old coat patched by her hand. They stood in a small circle and spoke promises out loud. No flourishes, no recitations, just truth. "I will keep you safe and never ask you to be smaller," James said. "I will walk beside you as long as the road allows," Clara said. Elsie took both their hands. "Now you're a family." And Tom, cheeks smudged with dirt, shouted, "Forever!" Later, after Elsie fell asleep curled at the foot of the bed and Tom snored on the cot by the stove, Clara sat with James on the porch, wrapped in a quilt. The full moon rose over the ridge. "You ever think where you'd have ended up if you hadn't sent that wire?" she asked. "I would have lasted," he said. "But I wouldn't have lived. I used to think love was a thing I couldn't hold," she said. "You're holding it now, and I'm not letting go." Years later, folks in Red Creek would say the Calder place never felt hard like the rest, something about the easy gates, or the smell of ink from the barn, or the way the children raised there learned to speak plain and kind. Elsie became a teacher. Tom printed wedding notices and birth announcements and one small book of stories penned by Elsie's daughter, bound in cloth and given to every child in the valley. James never left the land. He built an extra room when the grandchildren came and kept a carved wooden fox on the windowsill for a bedtime tale. And every spring morning, Clara rose early, brewed coffee, and stood on the porch waiting for the sky to open. James joined her always. He never brought up the past. She never needed to ask. They had already done the hardest part. What came next was theirs to keep. Together, they grew old. No fear, no doubt, no more running.